My name is Mark Hackett. I'm an architect. Been working in the city probably 25 years now. And in the last 6-7 years, I've worked in more urban design than building. I still do a few buildings, but I was one of the people who set up a thing called Forum for Alternative Belfast. And strangely enough, that was actually set up on the Shankill Road. I'll get to the story of how that happened. A few slides in. And that that closed about 2 years ago, and we sort of followed on the City Road Power. We're not as active as we were when we had this group called Forum for Alternative Belfast. Well, it was essentially a think tank, and it was sort of saying, how could we think about the city again from an urban design, planning, how people live in the city. That was kind of the agenda that we were looking at. And mostly we were concerned with the inner city areas, Lower Shankill and Shankill being one of those right around the city core. And how the city centre was starting to work, you can sort of see now, even after 5-6 years of recession, the city centre sort of survived through all that and is now coming out again. They're talking about building hotels or new university. There's a lot of activity in the city centre, and the city centre has been rejuvenated over the last 20 years consistently, really. But the areas around the city centre are not really feeling the benefit of that. That was one of the things that we said. And we felt that a lot of that was down to planning and, how government works with planning and how the planning system works and how that affects the economy and how people live. So we tended to work more as architects and planners at that level, but we did go out an awful lot in those years, and we've done a few events in the Spectrum Centre over the years as well. Trying to talk about different issues of housing or history. So we are kind of interested in the history of areas because that often lets you know what's happened in an area and maybe gives you part of the solution to what might happen in the future. And then Lower Shankill especially is an area that's, totally changed, as you all know. And I wanted to give you some, I think Evan invited me because I had some maps and some background on that might be of interest to you. So starting off with Belfast, 1939, it had 440,000 people at that time. It was then down to an equivalent of 270,000 people by 2010. Now the area of Belfast has since increased, so we brought new people into the area of Belfast. So the population has now been documented at around 300,000, 330,000, but that's actually because people are coming in to the boundary, not because there's any change. What's really happened is, you probably know, the city population is fairly stagnant for the last 30 years. It's sort of gone down really deep during the 70s, and it's really flatlined. And obviously the Troubles had a fair part to play in that, but actually I brought along some books from around 1965 to 1969, which are plans for the Belfast Urban Motorway and the redevelopment of the city at that time. And the redevelopment of the Shankill was going on at pace in the 1960s. Some of you might remember. Probably tell me a lot more about it than I know. But it's interesting for people in my generation to look back on that. So I call it the shrinking city that grew in size. So what happened as well is, during those 40 years, the population, Belfast spread around, but its population didn't increase. So that really tells you that the city's emptying out. Belfast is now twice the built area as it was in 1939, but it's still a lower population. And if you start thinking what that means, it sort of means the whole city is spreading out and people are using their car more often, they're walking less. And of course the Shankill was one of those areas, working class areas, especially the lower part, where it was dense housing, people working in mills, people working in shipyards, and you could walk or get a tram very quickly across to where you were working. And that's the city as it was in this book by Weiner. So this was my introduction to kind of wider history at the time from a colleague of mine, Ken Sterrett, who taught planning at Queen's University. He always said you should go and read this book, The Rape and Plunder of the Shankill Community Action. Published about 1975, but I think Ron Weiner was over here in about 1973, 74, doing his research for that, and I think he lived in and around the Shankill area, and he would have known Jackie Redpath. So that was an early way into it for me, and I hadn't been aware of the book as an architect. It wasn't really in our training. But it really documented, it was quite shocking read for me because I really started to understand that the people who lived in a lot of those houses were renting them for generations and weren't compensated for the loss of those houses as they gradually degraded during the 1950s and 60s. Because everybody knew a motorway was coming through, the plans from the motorway went back to the mid-50s. So people in the area probably knew. And I think at a certain time, I'm not sure when, there would have been a series of lines drawn on maps, and that would have been saying, right, we're going to put the motorway through here. Maybe we haven't agreed the design of it. And this is from 1969, these books. And they're fascinating. I brought them along to look at because we got them out of the library. Not very many copies of these left. But if you want, you come up later and you can sort of see, in 1969, they're doing detailed plans and detailed sections for the urban motorway. 3 options for how to cut under the River Lagan, go on a high-level bridge to allow ships underneath, or a low-level bridge, as was built in the M3. That wasn't built until the 1990s. So the other thing that fascinates me about the urban motorway is it's about 4 kilometres from there to there. And it was really only started in the 1970s, planned in 65. The last section, the York Street interchange, I'm working with groups there around that interchange because it has a large impact on all the neighbourhoods around that area. And that's not planned probably to be finished until 2025. So what's that, 50, 60 years of building 4 kilometres of road to get it actually done. And I think by the time that gets built, if you read your media these days, you kind of realise we're talking about driverless cars are definitely something that's going to come. You can already see many electric cars in the city. A lot of the taxi drivers are driving electric cars. I mean, I sort of think the idea of the motorway and that mode of transport is obviously going to change. And it's not us that's going to change it, the world is changing faster. I mean, one of the biggest factories in the world is a Tesla factory which makes batteries for the cars. I've seen it on TV recently, and it's the biggest factory in the world. He said if they had 10 factories that size, the whole of America would be driving electric cars. So that whole thing is not that far away from us that you might think, of being economic as well. Electric cars have been quite economic. And I think once you get into that, the notion that, why do we really have people driving around the city having accidents if we could have the technology to really put them in like a train? Especially when you get on motorways, you go to say, well, maybe we should be having computer-controlled cars, because essentially they would all just drive at a constant speed. It is a bit strange that we allow so many individuals to drive around the world and essentially create a lot of accidents when we could be all on buses or trains. So as you may know as well, it's a separate point, but a train and it is actually one of the safest modes of travel. Despite what you hear about train crashes, the number of people who travel by train in the Western world compared to the number of accidents is still the safest mode of travel. So when we did this, I couldn't spell Ron Weiner's name, so I googled him one time, and it's the easiest way for me to check spellings. I can get the E and I right, and I thought, oh, he's got a website. So I just googled and found out his website. I thought, I wonder, has he been back to Belfast since he wrote this book? And he said he had been once, but he'd only been for a day and he hadn't come back up to Shankill. So we invited him to, I think it was the 2008 Cathedral Quarter Festival. And we had a small event, and then we just invited him back over. We got Jackie Redpath down and Ken Sterrett, who was kind of known about the work as well. And we just met in the Cathedral Quarter in the Black Box, in a small room about this size, not even this size. And we had 60 people crowded in on a really warm Friday evening this time of year, and you were sort of thinking, how come 60 people come along on a Good Friday evening to hear about this book that's written 30, 40 years ago? The next day, a film team wanted to actually document him coming back to Belfast, so Ron and Jackie and Hugh Smith, I think, and a few others, and myself and Ken walked up to Shankill, and he sort of, was wanted to see the change and stuff, and we stopped into the Rex Bar for a pint at the end of all that. And he sort of said, well, the work that you're doing, inviting me over, and we've been doing some other work, and so he said, you need to formalise that, and you need to keep going. What you really need is a forum for Alternative Belfast. So that's where we had decided to become a group, actually, was out of that. And to read about how roads were taking over the city, I mean, the Shankill, which used to be a shopping street with buses and trolleys on it, became 4-lane road with no parking, and really that was done in the 80s. to make it what's called a transport corridor. And all the arterial routes in Belfast were gradually shifted to becoming transport corridors for cars coming in. They weren't seen as arterial routes with shops and people living in the streets of them to serve those. The arterial route being about getting people from the rest of Belfast into the city. The arterial route suddenly became about getting cars for people who didn't live in Belfast into the city. And that shift started in the 1980s. And that was one of the reasons given behind building the Wedebeeks block. And the campaign then, no demolition beyond this point. So that's photographs from the urban motorway and the impact on the lower Shankill. Through this we were doing a project about Lanark Way, just a small local history project, and in the research for that I've been sort of coming across websites. I found this photograph from 1923, which isn't that long. Can't have been too many planes knocking around here in 1923. So that's an aerial photograph from 1920, and I've coloured it up a little bit. So that's Dunville, Lanark Way. There's the Cooper Street, and you can sort of see the Shankill has got glare, unfortunately, from the sun. But it's a really, it's one of the earliest photographs I've ever seen of Belfast, and there was 3 or 4 photographs of Belfast. But that's Springfield Road, I think you can clearly see looping up. And you can sort of see as well, look at how little of the outskirts of Belfast are built in 1923. Incredible sort of photographs. So it would be good to get our hands on the photographs, the original photographs of that. But these ones are in the Ulster Museum, I think, and they start to show, I'll go to the next slide, Smithfield Market and the beginnings of the Old Lodge. No, that's the Old Lodge Road, isn't it? Mm-hmm. That's the Shankill. Yes. And you can see quite a tall mill building there. That's where the West Hall would be like. So again, I can leave some slides of these with you as well. You can want to circulate, and you can maybe zoom in and see them in a little bit more detail. That one I think is in the Ulster Museum, and I think it's quite a good, when you get the original photograph, you can zoom in and get quite a lot of detail. So for my generation, it's fascinating to see how close-knit and dense the city was. Of course, it had a lot of problems, like lack of toilets in houses and so on. But what we would really question these days is, rather than knocking all these houses down, would you not sort of knock them down in phases and maybe keep at least every other street and keep the line in the streets so there's some sense of history? What actually happened, as you know, was all the street pattern was completely gone. You really find it hard to trace anything. And one of the things we got asked a lot about as architects and planners was the peace walls in Belfast, and that was a kind of early attempt at marking them on a map around the city core. And we were always pointing out to people that these were all the other barriers that we noticed, mostly connected with road engineering, but also buildings and industrial estates and so on were acting as essentially barriers. Duncairn Gardens, Hillview Avenue, which was a road that was built in the 80s, but essentially a curved road with fences and sheds. It effectively became a de facto peace wall as well, in a sense. So we're sort of pointing out that the barriers in the city are everywhere. We sort of think the barriers are mainly to pedestrian movement or cycle movement, rather than thinking about car movement. That's the Shankill there. I mean, this is a map that a colleague of Ken's did. It's called a figure ground map. So the black areas are built forms. So you can sort of see here, that's the scale of the street. So there might be 50 or 100 houses here on any of those streets. And then these bigger buildings you start to recognise as the commercial buildings and shops. You can see the jail, for instance. You can see Clifton House. And you can see the cathedral here. But the cathedral had buildings around it. And I think this is just after the Second World War, where the bombing hit around the cathedral. There's the Customs House, for instance. And there's the old station over in East Belfast, where the railway used to come in. So we call this thing a figure ground map, and it really documents buildings against space left over. And here, that's quite coherent. You can read the streets. You can read all the streets as the white space left over. And then you look at these spaces and you think, well, what's that? Well, that's usually a park. There's the cemetery. There's the old Victoria Barracks where New Lodge is now. So that was a barracks yard. So once you delve in, you can work out what all the spaces are. This is it today. And you can sort of see that that's an incredible loss of buildings. You see, city centre remains the same. Just get that. You see the Odyssey in there on the right-hand side. So we use these maps and overlay them like that to really kind of, it starts to become a measure of what a big impact that has. Let's get back to some of the old photographs. These are from, where are these from? These are just after the Second World War, I think. These were a series of photographs commissioned by the mill owners around the UK. And in Belfast, they took quite a lot of the mills, but they went over to sign the mills and everywhere. And there's a great set of photographs from the Crumlin Road and these mills. So they don't really, they hit each side of the Shankill, but they're not in the Shankill, but they're great photographs to look at. And they sort of document that time. So there, for instance, is the Conway Mill, and that would be the streets in the Shankill. That's, first, second, third, I think, there. Conway streets. But you can sort of see the big mills on the sort of Falls Shankill area there. Incredible. So these were commissioned by the mill owners, and there's a website, which I've since lost, but I'll be able to find it somewhere again, where you can actually get all those photographs online for free. And I took screen grabs of these, so again, I could put them through on a file rather than Watson. But they are a fascinating set of photographs. Well, as you know, the Peace Wall went up, but what you also realise in these maps is, the original street pattern gets turned into low-density cul-de-sac housing. And that has a number of impacts. There's less people per square kilometre or per square mile. That means that there's less schools, there's less shops. So part of the kind of thing that went on in every area of Belfast was that change from, go back there, that change from dense terrace streets, and there's the same area now as cul-de-sacs. And you can see the obvious impact. That's the old Cooper Street Mill, and of course now it's gone. But that's Lanark Way, and that's the Peace Wall along Cooper Street. But you can see the houses were all dense on both sides of the wall, and that impact has really been felt all around the city. I think, probably even these streets are now gone as well, since that map was done. And again, when you look at the old photographs, you've got the historic monuments building. It used to be on Hill Street, but then it's moved. I'm not quite sure if you can still get access, but they have a great library of old photographs in Belfast. So it is worth delving into their boxes sometimes, and you see amazing photographs of what Clifton Street used to be like. You've got the Orange Hall there, and again, you can see it there. But an amazing set of buildings that have all gone now. All of those have gone. And that's really become, you can sort of see here, the mixed use on that street and so on. But, the arterial routes are really quite different, and some of them my age can't remember them at all like that, This is a map from the Ordnance Survey. Brought out a series of historical maps, and maybe you could find up, but it's in, I think it's usually sold in Waterstones, by the way, and they have this map, which highlights all the street networks in the old Falls and Shankill, and then notes that, of course, the connection of mill ponds and rivers was really what drove the linen industry and the mills at the time, the water coming off the mountain, and how those, Millfield is the old mill pond. So it sort of overlays a number of old maps. Those are kind of really interesting to look at for people in the area, I think. A lot of those waterways are now underground and culverted. This is a drawing from those books, and it shows that they were sort of thinking about the motorway, and you notice the dotted line. They never built the south side and up through to connect through to the east. This bit was built, the West Link, AM2, and the Cross Harbour Bridge. But right at that time, these areas were being identified for redevelopment right through the 60s. So again, the kind of deconstruction of the city, as I would call it, really pulling the population apart and saying, we'll put it back as low-density housing, move people out of Gavin, all of that idea that everybody would just drive in again. And I've heard the chief executive of council come out with an incredible statistic recently that 60% of the jobs in the city now are worked by people who don't live in the city council boundary area. 58%, I think it is. That's an incredible statistic. Like almost 60% of the people drive into Belfast, don't pay their rates here, and drive into Belfast and have employment generally in the city core. So the other thing that Belfast has noticed as it's trying to regenerate itself is that Belfast performs really quite well in UK cities as an economic driver or new companies coming in. There's a lot of new companies coming in for higher end jobs in Belfast, in the city centre. So it's performing quite well compared against other UK cities. It's in the top 5 league table, but it's also on the bottom table for areas of poverty and high deprivation. So it's a city of ultimate contrasts, and that was one of the things that we were always trying to draw attention to. We were pointing out that the roads and the redevelopment were a big part of creating that. You know, it isn't just about, planning and roads are very powerful mechanisms for shifting people around. People don't often even realise what's being done until 10, 15, 20 years later, but often the plans are sitting in books and this that are published on a shelf somewhere in government. That's the West Link connected to the M2 and the M3. That's the current York Street interchange. It's not even the most up-to-date drawing, so that project is still going forward. It's called, the contractors have brought a court case, so it's actually a slowdown at the minute. And one of the other reasons was that was going to get EU funding. Of course now it won't, with Brexit it won't get EU funding, so there's even doubt about when this would ever be done. But it is incredible that, you know, these 3 motorways collide around 8 traffic lights here. You know, so they essentially, you know, the M2, this sweeping road here, this new connection, currently comes down, as you know, onto ground level, round a sharp corner on traffic lights, stops at 2 traffic lights, and joins back on the West End. So the motorways were never really connected again at that time. Sorry, I'm jumping around a bit, but again, you can see the impact of the motorway cutting through on the old map versus the new map. And the loss of housing, you know, so you're sort of getting into, okay, bigger houses, but anyone that lives there will know that whilst you have a garden of some scale, there's a lot of wasted space in those layouts. There's a lot of space that has ended up getting, you know, anywhere you go around Belfast, people, you know, even you go into the Falls side now, there's small gardens, but the roads are much bigger and there's more car parking, even though most of the people don't have cars still in the inner city. Of course, people lived in a very different way in these tight streets, but even at the workshop, somebody was saying, well, give me back my old terrace house any day. You know, because at least in those layouts, the streets worked, people knew the streets were safe for kids to play in and so on. The new layouts of cul-de-sacs and so on are often feel unsafe and they're often designed too large. Well, I've got some photographs of that later. The other fascinating thing in these books is this is the options for the motorway. I always laugh at this drawing because it reminds me of an electrical drawing. You know, have you ever seen an electrical diagram for a project? It doesn't look like a city at all. You know, here underneath you can see all the streets and the city hall just underneath the map. And over the map of the city that's actually in that time when they were planning it completely intact. Okay, run down a lot. Walls facing industrialization, deindustrialization. The city did need renewed in the 50s and 60s, but what it got was really shock therapy. This road being cut through, and you know, trying to make up their options between the red and the blue. So I just find that a kind of crazy drawing because the road engineers in many ways were just given a free hand and all that. This is another interesting map from the census database, and it shows that the centre of Belfast has very low car ownership, 25 to 30% car ownership. The dark areas represent almost 100% car ownership. And what that shows you is that, you know, the 60% of the people who have their work in Belfast live in all the areas around Belfast for around 20, 30 miles around Belfast. And the road network is designed now to get them into the city centre, pretty much at the expense of the people who used to live in the city, I think. But it really shows that in most areas of Belfast, car ownership is still only like 50%. You know, so a lot of people in Belfast are trying to cycle or walk, or don't own a car, or don't know how to drive, or can't afford a car. So there's a big disparity between that. When you zoom in, and that was our study area that we always look at. So you can sort of see that, you know, you can, sure, that actually maps a little bit with the poverty map as well. So what we were always noticing was, you know, the old inner city communities, this is the street off Sandy Road, were facing new development that essentially put the car parking at the ground level with this apartment block. It goes up to 10 stories and has glass balconies on the other side. But on this side, it doesn't even attempt to tie into this street. I mean, it's so disrespectful of the people who live in the street. this new building that was built. And that, you know, that was happening all around the city core. These new developments were built in the 90s and you know, before the boom, before the bust happened. Really poor quality. Now the planners did outlaw ground floor car parking, but quite a lot of these buildings were built in past before they managed to get it outlawed. And they sort of said, well, you can't just put car parks at ground floor use because it really kills the street activity. And so you know, the road engineering then, Dunbar Link and all around the city core had another road, the inner ring road. It's created quite a lot of back to front buildings. Castle Court was deliberately built back to front. This is Grosvenor Road, the new bridge humping over, but you know, wasted land here. You know, this is only 400 metres from City Hall. You know, so it's not really a very good entrance to your city in terms of, you know, making it a pleasant space. So this is a series of maps going back to that map, the original one. And this is a map that we produced in 2009. We got together about 40 young architects and planners and students into a workshop, and we divided the city up. And over a week, well, we talked about a lot of stuff, but this was the first thing we called a summer school. So this was a thing we ran at Queen's University. And as I said, we got young graduates working for the week during the summer. And we were really trying to rethink and analyse the city. And this was the first time anyone had drawn a map of Belfast and said, let's just plot all the vacant pieces of land. Fairly obvious thing to do, you would think. But this was only done in 2009. So for us it was very curious why this map had never been produced before. We called it the Missing City because there's so much red on that map, it's almost equivalent to the entire city core. So that map was then launched actually in the council by the mayor and so on, and we started this thing of doing summer schools, and I might come to that later. But on that same map is the city core. These are the only houses left. I think there's a group just in the lower Shankill of the old original houses. And there's a bit up, there's old kitchen houses, some are up near Dunlow Park, and there's ones down at Hamel Street, and there's some, as you know, Brown Square there, Stephen Street, a couple there, 3 houses there from Garmoyle Street. If you actually go looking at Joy Street, as you know, the old Georgian ones, if you actually go looking for the original streets in the inner city, that's all that's left. Isn't it incredible? You know, just go back. That's back to the first map. It's all terrace streets and shops supported by those. And the only streets left are that. In fact, these are gone now. So at the minute they've knocked the rest of these down. They're in the process of doing that. So most of these streets probably won't survive. Where are those ones? I think those are gone too though. That's the Donegal Road. And then we started to try and map. Well, we said, well, it's not just the road, but sometimes the road kills space around it. So when they were building the road, they diverted sewers and underground services and electric cables. And it means when you go to some of the scraps of land around the West Bank, when you go to try and build them, you realise, we can't build them. There's so much stuff underground, it's too difficult to move now, that it actually kills a kind of, that's the West Bank. As it goes past the Shankill, there's areas of landscape there, you know, they can't really build one. So they're kind of left as buffer zones around the road. And then we put in a slightly different colour, you can't really see it here, but we put in the surface car parking as well. So we sort of said, well, this is the amount of space given over just the cars. So those are all big car parking spaces or roads. There's no buildings left, there's nobody living in those. And we called it the grey donut because it's kind of almost like a cancer, killing the city in a way, killing the ability to kind of walk into the city. We always pointed out that this map, anyone living in this map could walk 20 minutes and be in the city centre. Now in any other city in the world that makes sense, living within a 20-minute walk of a city centre is the most desirable place to be. And it's the most expensive place to be in many cities, and it's the place where everybody really wants to live. You know, that's why is it in this city, within 20 minutes walks in the cities where many people don't want to live? And I think a large part of it is down to how we planned it. So when you put those two maps together, the Missing City map and the grey donut, you kind of get that. And then when you start to try and pull it together in zones, you sort of say, well, as you know, down at York Street, right over to the river, there's a complete dead zone there, nobody really lives. The skirt route before it was done, but it's a lot of wasted land there. Hillview is largely empty. some of the mill wants to move away from that buildings in case. So these are buildings that are either in transition. So this isn't really the situation now. So when I did this map, the train and bus station is still going in, but we know there's a big project for that. So that essentially is not moving forward. The Sherwockel works over there. Large areas of land around the city core, which could be opportunities, but at the minute they're being wasted. That's sort of trying to show an aerial photograph that it's not just the West Link cutting through, it's also the inner box road killed a lot of building sites. They widened this road in the 1980s. So it's almost what I call a double cut. And then you've got Brown Square, Garrick Hill, and Lower Shankill. So the communities are really divided by big buffer space created by the road, and a lot of vacant sites. And there was never the economy to put those sites back once the road engineers said, okay, we need 5 meters off your building, so we're going to knock your building down. You have a car park for 40 years, and that was just for making the street 5 meters wider. But all those buildings along that edge, as you remember, they never got put back once that road was in. And the idea was that they should be put back. So a lot of these spaces just become cheap car parking, and then pretty poor development. Brown Squares, a lot of these, there's some of the few remaining houses. I think they've been refurbished recently.
They've been on the street.
Because there was a bit of a push to try and keep them, keep the population. But you got a road which for most of the day is lying empty, really. It's only full for a few hours, really. And then poor quality apartment buildings being built in the city centre, so they're not really places where families are going to live back. Sorry, this keeps going and going, but that's the Falls and Shankill. Let's drop down here. That's the Falls and Shankill interface. So that's where the Peace Wall went, but look at all the distortion of the streets that went all around. So it's just looking at streets. And then we went to North Belfast. So these are just the maps that we had available. North is to the left, city centre is on the right, and the cathedral would just be the middle right. So this is just looking at networks of streets. You start plotting the streets that have got lost and essentially disappeared. So these maps are just looking at streets. You sort of see it's over 40 years, it's an amazing kind of shift and change. And if you think about what that sort of city is, it's utterly connected. If I live here, I can go down there, I can zigzag. I can zigzag through any of these streets and take 5 or 6 routes from my house to where I want to go. Whereas the city that's replaced often means, you live at the end of this cul-de-sac, you can't go here, you have to actually go around here to get there. So
isn't that part of the problem now? If one lorry crashes in the West Link, the whole city comes to a halt.
Because
for 2 or 3 days.
Every day. All the traffic is being pushed into the West Link.
It's ridiculous. It just looks like a plan to destroy Belfast.
And it is that management of roads. They sort of think, well, we'll push more traffic onto major roads and make the roads bigger. But rather than actually allowing a network of roads, so the way Belfast was congested in the 1960s, in many ways was good congestion. I don't think it was that congested. But it meant that people had like 5 or 6 ways to get through the city. They could kind of zigzag through, and all the traffic speeds were lower. So people still lived on the street and could still play on the street. As you know now, the traffic's either completely stopped or it's flying 40 miles an hour. There's sort of no in between. So these are just a series of slides that I showed around the city core, and I really did these slides for people in the civil service who quite often had never been out past the city centre. And I wanted to show them that there was an awful lot of back to front streets. So I photographed, for 4 days I went and photographed all 350 back to front streets. So here you've got the back of a house, and that's the front of a building there. And that's a back, so I can't even remember where that is. I think that's probably Lower Falls, but you couldn't really tell, could you? There's lots of the city that looks like this now. But these houses have essentially been planned back to front. And as you know, in the Lower Shankill, a lot of that was done totally introverted into cul-de-sacs, but as you go along the streets, often the backs are facing the streets. Now that is a legacy of the Troubles, but it's not just that. It's how they decided to replan those houses. And when you put it all together, it has a really negative impact. So I did show 350 slides. I'm not going to show that many now. But I want you to look at, I'm only going to show you a selection. Look at the extent of the road space compared to the old streets. If you think back to the old streets and a few cars that were there and kids playing, Look at them now, the big road streets for parking lots of cars, which don't exist generally. Community safety, there's a lack of windows facing onto the street, and very few of the walls that you see are actually peace walls, they're just ordinary walls. And this is just a selection of the 350 photographs going right around the city core. So the starter, there's a Shankill now. So this was trying to emphasize to policymakers, this slideshow, to say that this isn't normal, you know, it's not normal to build a street back to front like that, and when you do it 300 times within 20 minutes of the city centre, that's the other side of that block. That has a really bad impact on the people who live in those areas. And then this is a different sort of map. We picked up that Nottingham, we were looking at those photographs and saying, well, look, they look very hard. There's no gardens, there's very few trees. It's a pretty tough, grey environment for kids to grow up in. And these are all around the city core. And all the parks in Belfast were planned in the age of the Victorian city when they got to it, but you could walk to those parks relatively easily. There wasn't many parks in the city centre, to be honest. And it's one of the things that you would change about the city. You would sort of say we need more parks near the city centre, because when you're in the dense city centre, there's no green space really. So as you pick them up, these little lines, which you can probably not see, are 1 kilometre. And we picked up that other cities around the UK, like Nottingham, for instance, had a standard, and they said, our standard for the new plan for the city is that everybody should live within 1 kilometre of a park, and everybody should live within 300 to 400 metres of a secondary green space. So 1 kilometre of a proper park, and within 200 or 300 metres of a reasonably good, well-maintained green space, not a scrap of grass somewhere around. And that shows everybody within that zone, which is a good part of the Lower Shankill. There is some secondary green spaces in the Lower Shankill, but it's quite a way to get up to Woodville Park. And when you live in the Lower Shankill, of course, with the Peace Wall, you're less likely to want to go to Dunville Park. It's not that big anyway. And if you live in this part of the city, you can't actually cross to Alma Park because there's a bridge planned for there, but it's not been built. It's been talked about for 10 years. And if that bridge was built, for instance, suddenly this part would disappear from the map. Suddenly all of this would then be close to the Alma Park. And if you live in this part of the city, you've got former industrial lands there. It's quite a way out to Victoria Park. And again, anybody in the lower Newton Arch Road area doesn't really live within 1 kilometre of a park. So that's saying that's kind of an analytical map. Now, part of this has got to do with peace walls, but not actually that much of it. Some of it's just to do with a lack of thinking about parks. We thought about the road was driven through. There's the York Street interchange, and there's the Scirocco Works and the former coal yards there. You know, we never thought to build a new city park. So that was one of the things we were advocating for. We said there should be a project for a big new significant city park, or well-designed one, to make the city more livable. Because one of the objectives, the new city centre plan is being planned at the minute. It's called the Local Development Plan. There's a thing called a Community Plan has been out and talked about as well. It's called the Belfast Agenda. And the LDP has just finished the Local Development Plan consultation on the issues paper, right? So there was a huge amount of papers come out, which I didn't even read. They were sort of saying, well, this is the direction we want the city to take. So we said back to them, look, this is a very difficult thing for most people to engage with, this amount of paperwork, this sort of stuff. Like, you know, can we simplify this and talk about the objectives of the city centre? And one of the narratives is that the city centre is doing well and we need to build more hotels and we need to do all that sort of stuff. But we think that there needs to be kind of basic standards put into the city, like, you know, green space, parking. If we're going to build, one of their objectives I meant to get to was, in the new city plan, they're saying we want to increase the city population by 70,000 within about 15 years. So for the first time, Belfast is saying we want more people living in it. And they would predominantly see that in and around the city centre, but there is no real plan for how to do it. There's no parks, there's no schools, there's no doctors in the city centre. You know, there's all those things that people would need if they're going to live. And that map is trying to make a
Well, they're not bringing in the students.
Well,
Or the
yeah, but they're
university,
temporary
maybe
residents, really.
10,000 or something.
Yeah.
They're going to need an infrastructure.
They're going to need infrastructure as well, but that hasn't really been thought about. But the students are quite a temporary policy, you know. But the idea would be you would like the students to, if they get married, or you know, a lot of students would be foreign students as well, by the way, who in those new blocks. A lot of the local students now travel and don't really stay. So they reckon the higher rents in those new blocks, they reckon it's a lot of the international students are really the only ones that are going to afford to pay there. But if you know you want to say to your student population, there's a new university coming into the city, you'd be wanting to say, well, let's target 10% of them and say, well, we'd really like 10% of those graduates to come and stay in the city, get married, have kids, contribute. You know, because there's no point everybody going to university and then disappearing from Belfast. You do need them back. And you need them to stay, is what we said. And those people who are coming in and living in student blocks or whatever, like the city centre, they might want to stay, but there comes a point in their life where they're forced out because we're not providing any good sort of apartment blocks with big balconies. We're not providing any parks. So if you live in the centre of Paris, right, imagine that. But if you live in the centre of Paris, there's parks everywhere. There's play facilities everywhere. I went to visit quite a few countries where I keep an eye open on these things. I was in Barcelona recently. You know, looking at all the schools. It was in 9-story blocks of accommodation that I was staying in. It's a whole area and everything around. And I was within 9 blocks of those, 1.5 blocks of where I was staying in the middle of Barcelona. I managed to get another one of those. Just went online. Oh, there's a shop just around the corner. The last time I lived there for 3 weeks with a friend one time, back when I was 28 to 29. I had an ear infection, so I went to hospital. The hospital was 3 blocks away. You know, everything was existing, and there was parks and so on, and there was kindergartens and schools. You know, so we need to think, how are we going to put that infrastructure back? So this is very much a story of a road, an idea about redevelopment of a dense housing area, and thinking 60 years later, architects and planners and people who think, well, how do we make cities work for the future? We're sort of saying we need to get away from cars, we need to get people walking again. The only way to make a city like that work is for people to live closer together. So in the big cycle of things, you know, you went from living in dense streets, and you know, most people recognise now that we can't just depend on cars to live out everywhere we want, because that mode of the city doesn't work anymore. You know, all the American cities that did that in the 50s and 60s are all the people are coming back to those cities now. And the most desirable places to live are back in the city centres. And you can see that throughout the world. So Belfast really is a city, a good 20, 30 years gap behind itself, you know. To kind of realise we need to rebuild the city. But I find it very ironic that we put all of this effort and money into these roads that will probably become obsolete before they're even finished. So
the bicycles seem to be working in the city.
In the city, but not maybe so much. It's a braver person that cycles from their house into the city. You know, people maybe come into the city and use the bikes to get around. There's not so many breaking that big cordon of roads around and cycling. It's quite difficult, as you know. You'll see a cyclist on a road now, and I always think that you need to be pretty brave, you know, and the amount of potholes and stuff. But you go to other cities, like I've lived in Berlin one time when I was a young graduate, and you know, within 6 months, I was on a bike. It's a very flat city, but there was like dedicated lanes, and you could take your bike on the tram. So it was a long journey. You could just take your bike for free on the tram, and they had a really good public transport system. So you could just survive everywhere, walking, bikes. The bikes weren't stolen and vandalised in the same way. You know, it was just a different way of living. You know, and this is the choice the city faces. I sort of think Belfast has been stagnant for years and years and years now because we don't have the vibrancy, because we don't have the population. We don't have people living close enough into the centre to make it work. And that statistic of the 60% of people coming in to take the jobs that are available is quite shocking. So you sort of think the neighbourhoods that have been kind of left behind, and the young people in those areas, are they getting those jobs? Generally not. You know, so this is the kind of, these issues are all connected in my view, you know. So we tried to run summer schools, and really what we were saying was, look, all around the city centre, you have all these streets and areas that are broken. That's your opportunity to fix the city and to pull it back all together again. So we identified all these yellow streets as the bits that really didn't work. So as you know, going down the Shankill, there comes a point near the bottom where there's nothing left. And there's one apartment building there, and from there now as well, when you go into the city centre, the block's just recently demolished there, until you get to the butcher shop on Inner North Street, you know, on the banks line in. You know, so top, there's Royal Avenue, you know, which is really meant to be the main shopping street, you know, but that whole stretch of the road, it's more or less dead as a doornail in terms of shops or activity, you know, and until you get that fixed, until that's kind of fixed, it doesn't make it easier for people who live in the Shankill to really think about, oh, I'm just going to walk into town today. I mean, many of you would think of just walking into town, or many of your kids would think of walking into town. You would walk into town? Yeah.
Well, that's a keep fit, that's not the, that's just a...
But I mean, well, I walk into town quite a lot too, but you have to be quite toughened to cross all those roads and do it at night and stuff, but... Okay, well, that's the end of the talk.
Look, I wouldn't like to see the lovely Victorian buildings pulled down because they're lovely.
Well, and they all are being pulled down a
And
bit.
I don't like modern architecture because to me they're like cornflake boxes. That's my opinion of them. I do not like them.
Yeah.
And
A bit too flat,
Belfast
maybe.
was a beautiful Victorian city.
And we're still losing. What's happening now is the City Council is trying to protect some of the old buildings.
Yeah.
Look what happened in North Street.
They're putting spot
Those
listings.
ones, They just pulled down those buildings at the, it was like a big beam coming out at the top of it.
Yeah.
And obviously old storage areas or whatever, where the white bank is.
Yeah.
Just somebody walked in, knocked them all down.
And do you know why that's happening? Partly because they went around trying to protect, because they now got planning powers, they've been trying to protect some buildings that aren't listed, and they've been spot listing, what's called spot listing them, so they can go in and emergency spot list them. But some of the developers are knocking them down over weekends and
I
stuff.
think it's
That's
really
what
a
they've done
rebel
there.
city, to be quite truthful.
Yeah, but it's going on again,
Horrible.
just as we
Horrible.
sit here now. And the reason it's going on is because they know the council are trying to spot list them. The developers in turn are saying, oh, I've got an old building, it's not listed.
Knock it down.
I'll knock it down as quick as I can before they get a chance to list it. So we're now seeing a new rash. People have been saying that recently, a new rash of, not the best buildings, but they're actually some of them are okay buildings, and those ones are quite run down. But a lot of people would have liked to see them
I'd
fixed
like to
up.
see that they're kept and maintained, but
But it just goes.
over a weekend, it was all pulled down.
And definitely, you know, the modern buildings, the problem with a lot of the modern buildings are they're driven by commercial developers, and there's only one thing behind them, which is money. So they do, you know, you call them cornflakes boxes, they are a bit thin like that.
But probably they don't frequent the city very much, so it wouldn't worry them. They're putting them down and doing them to their own specifications, and they're horrible, absolutely horrible.
Well, they're
There's
built to
no-
make money. Yeah.
And they're built the last 25 years or so, and then they'll fall down and replace them with something else.
But the city that we're looking at was built sometimes with pride. You know, the people, the developers and investors in the city at that time were competing against each other.
Yeah.
So, you know, all the mills were sort of saying, okay, there were mills, but the buildings they had in the city centre, the warehouses for linen, you know, half of them were sort of going, I want to do a better building than that company, and they kind of show off a little bit. That was a good kind of showing off because we could all benefit by looking at those good buildings, but I think that's totally lost now. There's no civic pride left because most of the development is a pure money game, and as you say, crucial issue is the people who are doing it aren't really living in the city.
No,
They're
they
not-
don't have to look at it.
they're not really thinking beyond. They might have a lifespan of 25 years, but they probably only have a financial span of a couple of years. Those are sold off. But once the developer finishes, they're sold to pension companies and investing companies who really don't care if the building. All they really care about is it just won't technically fall down.
Like if you look at one of
And they're
those,
just getting the rent in.
if you look at one of those big buildings, it actually tells you what industries we have here.
Yeah.
Shows you the ships and all this. It's carved into the building on the top. Our tutor told us to always look up and see what that building was used for, or what connection it was had with the industries here.
And you know, we do have to reinvent the city, but I think the point is you don't have to reinvent all the buildings.
No, and take the history away from it altogether. That's my opinion. I think we're trying to ruin the
So
history.
some of those buildings have been reused, and as you know, some of them have been fixed up and kept. And you know, I think the city council would like to be more proactive in that sense. But what they're worried about now is, so this is a little dogfight that's going on just as we speak over these months. They're spot listing, but the spot listing has to be followed up by the historic monuments people coming up with full listing. Otherwise, that spot listing will be taken away in 6 months or a year. And now they're not sure that when they spot list something, that the other government department will come in and back them up. So a lot of those buildings are in danger again. And I think that's the point when you go to protect something, unless you've got very draconian laws, the developers are all working sideways over the weekends to kind of, this building might get listed or whatever. So that's what happened on
Knock
North
it
Street
down, knock it down, and then
really quickly. And it's a real shock when you see the lower North Street now, and then some both sides of the roads now as well, because I always sit and look at the little butchers as the last one left there,
Yeah.
So,
Are you getting any city councillors attending your summer schools?
well, we did over the years, but we had to close. And I mean, I think what we found was the city councillors were quite often supportive of what we were talking about from all the parties. Were kind of interested in the talk, but when it came down to one of the reasons we had to close was we couldn't get any more funding. So we attracted some funding from a London-based organisation that supported us for 3 years. But once that was gone, there was nothing. There was no new. Some of the councillors now say we really need a think tank, because they don't always have the skills in the government departments to do these things anymore. So one of the scary statistics I found out was, there's only about 2 or 3 senior architects working in the whole of government. There's some low-level architects, but they're not allowed to be architects. They're more or less civil servants first. And there's nobody there really saying this is wrong or this is right. And there's very few. A lot of the planners are really acting like a kind of planning police at the minute. They're not really creatively thinking, how should we rebuild the city?
What they're scared of is somebody, the developer, taking a judicial review.
Yeah.
So the civil servants will panic and then they'll hide.
And they've allowed a planning system that is too driven by legal things in the Planning Appeals Commission. And most of the developers now will take them to the Planning Appeals Commission and the judicial review. So the whole planning system we've got has been far too legally based, and we've been arguing for them to say, look, the only way to get around this is have a very definitive plan. To say, well, actually that site, it's 18 metres or 14 metres, that's the height. Give it a number. Don't be vague, in other words. When you look at planning legislation, it's quite vague. And it's all a bit like, we'll judge each project on its merits. And that's just an invitation to people to say, well, I want to build a tower block. So that's kind of what we summarised all our work down to. We sort of said, well, look, this is the city you've got. You've got a commercial core that works. But all the neighbourhoods around are kind of disconnected, or they're brown squares, like a little isolated community, as is Carrick Hill and parts of New Lodge and the markets. And these two represent essentially Donegal Pass and Sandy Row, which are kind of in retreat. Half the population's gone. So they don't really connect to the city core, even though they're right beside it. They're seeing developments building right up against them. And really we were saying, well, what we need to try and do is rebuild a connected city. And that's about getting the commercial stuff to mix with the neighbourhoods. So it's about trying to say, well, there should be commercial buildings on the Shankill Road, but above them and behind them would then be housing and stuff. And how could we get people living back in the city? How could we get people who live in suburban land and out of the city to think, I want to move back into Belfast now? That's a bit of a sell. Everybody in the city would need to get behind that agenda, because it's not, this part of the city is not very attractive for most people who've got a choice and got some money. How would you convince them to move back in? Is a discussion I think everybody used to have.
Go on for years, that one.
But I was trying to just show there, these books are here if you want to leaf through them. They're kind of rare now. But it just feels like a bit of a long cycle, doesn't it? And the Shankill very much had the name of being part of that, with Ron Wiener's book brought it to academics' attention and planners' attention. And the campaign to stop the motorway redevelopment, I think, largely won out, and that's why the shops you have remain, because I think that campaign that was fought in the 70s kind of wanted to stop knocking down the Shankill. You sort of know, that point where shops remain. Well, the intention was to take that right way up the Shankill. So, these are difficult issues to engage with, and the local development plan is, it's not even a book anymore. It's just what we call a PDF. It's like 6 or 7 PDFs you have to look on your computer, and you'd have to struggle to get a paper copy these days. But it's very kind of hard, I think, for anyone to engage with that sort of process. But this, it is a big long cycle, isn't it? You think 1965, all of this has been going on, and we're sort of, I'd say we're another 15 years before Belfast really starts to feel like it turns the circle of thinking about making itself a city.
Maybe keep you in a job for 15 years. Maybe keep you in a job for 15 years.
Yeah. Somebody will get paid for doing this.
excuse me, during the 60s, there was an architect down Plunder who threw this sort of exercise, the Matthew Plan.
Yeah, well, that's part of
Was
that.
it ever implemented or even part of it, or was the whole thing just forgotten about?
Well, do you know what I think happened? All the worst aspects of what I've shown to you are really the Matthew Plan badly implemented. See, these books are essentially part of the Matthew Plan.
Yeah.
They're the follow-on from it. But Matthew's plan was fairly controversial. He was saying, okay, let's build the urban motorway. Let's get people out of the inner city and into suburbs and Creekhaven and stuff. So, by and large, the Matthew Plan was discredited as a way of thinking by the mid-70s, but we kept doing it. So I think we kept implementing the Matthew Plan right up until the millennium. We just didn't do it very well.
Yeah.
So Matthew kind of had this idea that what we now think of as lots of vacant sites, car parks, pretty intimidating places to walk past, that whole white zone around the city centre, he envisages that as kind of motorway with parks and stuff, you know. But as we know, even when you did those parks, they tended to be not places people really owned, so they become leftover pieces of green space. So that whole Matthew Plan way of thinking was implemented in many UK cities, but see, by the 1970s, 1975, everybody was starting to question the wisdom of it. And that's what I'm saying. Right through the 70s to the 80s, most planners and urbanists, as we call them, around the world, got to this idea that we've got to rebuild and refix and keep our city centres. So a lot of other cities during the 1980s, they were turning themselves around. So for instance, city you've heard of, Copenhagen, has the highest amount of cycling. It's an affluent city, lots of people living in it. But Copenhagen in the 1960s was getting congested, and there was some people who were sort of talking about putting new roads through, but they didn't. They stopped it and they turned it around, and they gradually pedestrianised a lot of the streets, and they gradually, year on year, increased the number of cycling, and they didn't throw all their people out. So some cities have managed to change better, and they really started to learn that lesson in the 1980s. And I think the problem with Belfast is we just kept going. Like, we're still building a motorway. What other city would be considering implementing a £165 million motorway to build like half a square kilometre of roads is costing 165 million?
Excuse me. I mean, we went through a period of a lot of years here with the truckles on. I mean, if there had been parks, different things in the city centre,
They wouldn't have
who could have went to them?
Yeah.
I mean, you couldn't even go in the shop because of the cities, and so I think that's why people were never really interested in living directly down near the city centre, because
There's a dangerous place.
after 6 o'clock at night, there's no bus services or anything. So, I think you've got to take that into consideration as why we have failed.
I think
In a lot of these countries, you didn't have all that.
that's why I say in the 80s, that's what was happening here in the 80s. But I think there's two different levels of that. I mean, obviously, that was going on, but what I think hasn't gone on in government or within planners or architects and road engineers, especially here, the road engineers are still living in the 1960s here in this city. So we are there's things that we could change, and we have had 10 or 15 years, 20 years really of rapid development. There's a lot of things that changed about the city centre. So my real question is, why hasn't it changed around? And it was very obvious to everybody that there could have been a park there for the last 20 years, so why wasn't land found for it, developed, and we'd have it built by now? So things take time to plan, and people need to think ahead. So even in the 80s, in the worst time, we never had a plan. We didn't, as you say, we didn't believe in the city. I mean, that was the crucial issue. Nobody really believed in this city.
You couldn't get in it.
Couldn't get
It was
into it.
closed down at night, and that was it. So it was a ghost town. I mean, you can understand why people didn't probably want to do big lots of development near it, because you couldn't get it,
And I think they missed their chance of saying, when the new development did come in the 90s, that they allowed it to be really poor development. And that's when what you're talking about started. The old buildings started to get knocked down. And most of the old buildings in Belfast are knocked down. They're knocked down by developers. It wasn't really the homes that did most of it. It was the development and the road development as well, knocking a lot of it down. So it is about, how do we think 10, 15 years ahead of where we think they're going to be.
They done that in our road in the Woodstock, took the bottom away. They've knocked our houses down, they didn't put as many up again.
Yeah.
They really ruined the bottom of the road, but they've cut it off. There's a big church, you know, and then if you go onto the Albert Bridge Road, you have to come up. My brother was away for
Straight
years and he
up.
didn't recognise the place whenever he came home.
Yeah, because it's so gone.
The bottom is away. It went right out onto the Albert Bridge Road as it was then.
But I think it all happened because of what you're saying. You know, somebody said to me early on, said, Mark, you know, the road engineers just took up the vacuum that everybody left. So because people had sort of, you know, during the Troubles, but what I was really trying to say was a lot of the stuff was being planned anyway, and I think would have happened anyway. And the only way it would stop is if enough people in the city are saying stop. And what they did do in the 70s, the 80s, and other cities, they said stop building these motorways, stop building these new concrete blocks. They really put a halt onto it and started a different form of development. And of course, we're 20, 30 years, we've not really thought about the city. You know, we know the city's not working anymore, but we haven't thought how we're going to fix it and what we should protect. And there is a stronger call now to keep the old buildings.
And they
but
should have built streets instead of cul-de-sacs, as I call them. They're
Yeah.
horrible. They're absolutely horrible. And all the litter all lies over the place. They should have put back the streets instead of that. That was to stop the fighting each other, you know what I mean? This
That was
is-
the reason used, but you see, I would think there's a different thing going on there as well. When they were designing those streets, there was architects, planners, and road engineers involved in that. Three professions, and I'd be quite critical of my own profession. They should, you know, my architects didn't stand up and say what should have been happening, because architects all around the world from 1980 had reassessed all the ideas of the 60s, the motorways, the tower blocks. You wouldn't have found an architect in 1980 who was advocating for those things anymore. They all realised you needed to fix the city, and you needed to put back streets and stuff.
You see, we were called
40
up to the
years now.
Unionist Hall and told they're pulling the houses down, but we won't be rehousing
This is
so
what you
many
get.
people again. And then I asked myself, why did they not build streets again? And I was told, well, it had to do with the Troubles.
But it didn't really. If you're in the middle of an area, it wasn't really. At the interfaces with areas, that was sometimes the case. But like, why didn't they build? We had walls in this city anyway. Why didn't they build the streets normally and have a peace wall at the end? You know, the peace walls did stop a lot of the kind of movement. So that internalized street network was done everywhere, whether it was close to an interface area or not. And I think it was just a kind of way of thinking from the road engineers to provide too much car parking. So all the neighbourhoods, they all said, oh, but people now have a car each. Facts are that people still don't have a car each. So this is a lot to do with the civil servant designers making assumptions which were the wrong assumptions. And nobody's saying, why don't we put back streets at a high policy level? And I think that could have been done. That's what I'm a little bit critical of all this, because I think people should have been saying no. People at government level, professionals should have been saying no. There is a blame or a burden that architects, planners and road engineers need to share about what they did to this city.
When you see, it got so bad that when they built the cul-de-sac places and old people that had lived there for years went onto the Ravenhill Road and didn't know how to go back into their home again, and they were getting distressed.
Yeah, in that whole
Do you
area.
understand what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
We're using the streets run straight down to the Ravenhill Road, but then when they built these cul-de-sac things, then that blocked off, and then when the old people decided to go out on the Ravenhill Road, they couldn't get home.
Yeah. Well, that's my experience of walking around. I used to live over there, and that's my experience of
Yeah.
in lots of parts of Belfast. When you first encounter it, you can't actually get to where you think you want to go. So that's got me curious about why is that, you know?
That was terrible.
I'm afraid we not solve the Belfast problems in the next 10 minutes. But I found that talk very interesting. You depressed me.
Oh, well.
For all the plans I have, all I've seen in this city for the last 20 years, a lot of building going on, but nothing seems to be planned.
And there's a lot of plans that never make it beyond paper.
Yeah.
There's a lot of small plans that aren't joined up, but they all go and sit on a shelf somewhere. I've seen a lot of small plans all around the city. I'm sure a lot of you engage with some of them. neighbourhood plans and all that sort of stuff. But look at what happened. The power was really behind the road engineers at the end of the day. They were the ones who had enough money and enough powers to drive the roads through, and followed that the rehousing. And, you know, I think that's still the problem. We've got a city council now that, we've got a city council that's planning powers back, but it doesn't have any money. You know, it doesn't really have central government money anymore. It doesn't have the same money that was around for the last 20 years. And they don't have control of the road engineers. So the road engineers are still in a different department. And every time you challenge them, I'm still doing it all the time now. Every time you challenge them, it's no, it's our way, our rules, that's it. No discussion. No discussion about how people use space.
What I think of our city council is there's plenty of power, but no vision.
Well,
But we'd like to thank you for this call.
Thank you for inviting me.
Come back again in a few years, please.